Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Before I begin today, a huge thank you to Trazin the Infinite for the virtual gift voucher. Huge thank you, my friend, for the support. It is truly appreciated. Thank you. And who knew Trazin was a fan of the channel? Whoever you are, thank you anyway. But with that said, on to today. So with the upcoming new edition of Age of Sigmar, I thought the time has come for the Wolf Lord to choose a faction and begin my first Age of Sigmar collection. However, of course, when starting a new army, making the decision on who to go for is not always so straightforward. And whereas 40k my heart immediately belongs to the Space Marines, it's not so simple with Age of Sigmar. There's no faction that I just see and they say that is the one. So it's going to take a little more thought. Now what's the criteria for me? Well, first up we'll say the overall feel of the army. Now I'm not talking, oh that's some nice smooth plastic, but you know, it's just that something that draws you to the army. Whether it's the artwork or the models, whatever it is, it's just that something you can't quite put your finger on. After that, I'll consider the range. The amount of units available, do they have a nice selection or not? Because let's be real, some factions have got a huge amount to choose from, whereas a lot of the other factions are much more limited in scope. And also here we'll consider the age of the range. Scale differences within a force really bug me. It's just a personal thing, but I absolutely can't stand it. I don't really think it's as much of a problem in Age of Sigmar as it can be in some 40k factions, but I'll keep it in mind anyway. Next up we have a pretty important one, and that is ease of painting. Quite simply, as I've said before, I am very bad at painting. So this Age of Sigmar faction could be the time where I make the time to sit down and finally practice. Maybe do a little monthly update every now and again just to let you guys see how I'm getting on. Time as always is the hardest thing to come by, but I'm determined to try and make it work. So with that consideration, another point is the similarity of the range. Can I use the same painting techniques across the whole army, or is it vastly different? As someone who really needs the practice to get better, I'm going with the logic that the more techniques I can use across the whole faction will really leave me in a better position rather than one where I'm completely having to change it up with every single unit. Now maybe some pro painters out there are shaking their head, but with my novice mind that's what I've got in mind. Now the last criteria I will consider is the lore. I'm no expert yet when it comes to the Age of Sigmar lore, there is no doubt about that. But again, it kind of ties into the feel of the faction. You can definitely get a grasp for certain factions' theme and lore before you dive in. I'm not going to go through every single faction here because we'll be here all day. So we're just going to jump between the main consideration factions. Okay, so beginning with Grand Alliance Order. The first faction that falls into consideration is the Edenef Deepkin. Edenef, however you pronounce it. The dudes from the water have definitely got a vibe I like. First of all, they're fresh and new. With the old world already in development, do I really want to play a faction that I can simply just transfer over to that when it releases? While that definitely has its perks, I'm almost in two minds because it kind of defeats the point of diving into Age of Sigmar. So the Edenef definitely do have their perks, and they most definitely have a unique story. Being cast aside by Teaklis, hiding at the bottom of the oceans, now left to steal souls to survive. Now that's definitely a cool theme I can get behind. And I'm a big fan of the nature vibe. So the Deepkin have got a lot going for them. However, the big drawback I can see here is they may not be the easiest faction to paint. I mean, there's a lot of different styles going on here. I feel I'd need to try and switch it up across the range as I go. And as someone that really wants to try and improve his painting by using the same technique, I'm not sure the Deepkin will be the way to go. However, just on theme and range alone, they are definitely moving through to the final. Next up within the Grand Alliance order, we had the Luminous Realm Lords. Now these guys are a definite possibility. First up, I love the tying hallmarks back to the old High Elves. There's just enough there to make them feel familiar, and yet just enough different to make them feel like a new, different faction. They definitely have a new, distinct aesthetic that I quite like. I'm not a big fan of this standard colour scheme, but I've seen some alternate ones that are definitely intriguing. Now the big advantage these guys have is their range is huge. And I do already have that launch box set that came out for them, what was it, last year? So I could begin with that without having to buy a bunch of new models. In regards to their lore, I'm not a huge expert, but being from the realm of light, they are quite obviously the good guys. But they did have some pretty good updates in the last campaign supplement to the Broken Realms, with Teclis essentially going toe to toe with Nagash himself. And not only going toe to toe, but coming out with the win. So having the Luminous Realm Lords on the march is a pretty good lore standing. Now again, the big concern I have for these guys is kind of similar to the Deepkin, is that I do have a concern when it comes to painting. And that moves up to a big concern when you look at some of the larger models. So they're kind of at a similar place when it comes to the Deepkin to me. They've got a cool range with a definite standing in the lore that I can get behind. However, the ease of painting is a concern. Next up in Grand Alliance order, we have the Stormcast Eternals. Now these guys would maybe a consideration for me. However, both of my mates who are starting an Age of Sigmar force with me have both gone for Stormcast Eternals. And I don't blame them, because let's be real here, the models coming in the Dominion box set look absolutely gorgeous. The Stormcast have got a huge range and they have a pretty easy level of painting. But I just can't have all of us starting Stormcast Eternals armies. So for that reason, the Stormcast are out. The final consideration I have within the Grand Alliance order is the Sylvan F. Again, like I said for the Deepkin, I am a big fan of the nature theme. These guys are essentially nature incarnate. I just love the look and feel of the entire faction. No, the range isn't that big, but what is there, I am pretty much a huge fan of everything. And while I could be wrong, I think I'll be able to transfer the same painting techniques from the very basic Dryad all the way up to the huge tree men. So hopefully this will really help me improve as I go on. As for the lore, well, I'm not a huge expert, but I do believe the Sylvan F are going to have quite a prominent role in this new edition. From what I gather, Alariel is going back on the offensive, so there could be some interesting new units coming out for them over the next year or so. So if we add it all up, the Sylvan F are 100% among the top considerations. Okay, moving on to Grand Alliance Chaos. There's no one faction that's really standing out for me here, but a combined overall Grand Alliance Chaos force. Now that could be interesting. Any Chaos Demons, of course, I could then transfer over to 40k. And that start collecting Slaves to Darkness force, well, what's not to love there? Each and every model in that box looks absolutely jaw-dropping. However, the only problem I can see in going for a unified force like that is I would be having to go with a completely different painting technique for every single unit. Anytime I wanted to go for a Slaanesh unit of demons, over to Nurgle or Tzeentch and then back to Slaves to Darkness, it's pretty much a whole new host of colours to try and master. And while maybe in the long run that could lead me to being a very good painter, to start out I just don't think that's the way to go. I haven't picked up a paintbrush for any period of long time, for many years. So I just don't think Chaos is the way to go. Now, Grand Alliance Destruction, unfortunately there's just nothing within this faction that really grabs my appeal. I like the character of the Gloomspite Gits, but not enough to make me want to start a force. So we're just going to have to move on to the Grand Alliance Def. Now, the Grand Alliance Def does have a lot going for it. It's got the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, a completely new faction, who have an absolute ton going for them in the lore sense. I love the idea of the Bone Tithe. And in terms of painting, I definitely could use the same technique across the entire force. However, while I like the basic rank and file troops, the skeleton warriors and the cavalry, I'm just not a fan of those big monster units. And while that may change over time, for now at least the Ossiarch Bone Reapers are not moving on to final consideration. And really that same logic applies to the Soul Blight Gravelords too. I'm definitely a big fan of some of the rank and file units, and indeed that Vampire Lord on foot, but for those bigger named characters, they're just not speaking to me just yet. So the Soul Blight Gravelords are out too. Flesh Eater Cults, no, there's nothing there that really grabs my attention. However, the saving grace for Grand Alliance Def is the Nighthaunt. Now this faction has a lot going for it. First of all, the range is large. And not only that, they have a lot of easy build units too, which saves a huge amount of time when it comes to building your forces. And not only that, it's also pretty much an entirely new range, so all of the sculpts look absolutely gorgeous. And then this really ties into the painting too. While there are some different colour schemes going on, I could pretty much use the entirely same technique across every single character and unit I paint. So the Nighthaunt, in my opinion, really do have a lot going for them for someone new to Age of Sigmar. It's an entirely new range, like I said, a lot of easy build units, and I can use the same technique. What's not to love? So overall, who have we got to finally choose between? The Eden F Deepkin, the Luminous Realm Lords, the Sylvan F, and the Nighthaunt. They're all some pretty interesting factions, there's no doubt about it. However, immediately I think I'm going to have to leave behind the Eden F Deepkin and the Luminous Realm Lords. When it comes down to comparing all of the strongest pros and cons of all the factions, I just think the Sylvan F and the Nighthaunt have the most going for them. The biggest one being drawing down to the painting. For the Sylvan F and the Nighthaunt, I truly believe I can use the same techniques across pretty much the entire range, which I'm hoping would really help me improve my painting in the least amount of time. Now, I'm not saying it wouldn't take a long time to improve. After 20 plus years in the hobby, trust me, I'm under no illusions in that regard. But like I said, I just think using the same techniques over and over again really just falls down to practice makes perfect. and the Sylvan F and the Nighthaunt simply have the advantage in that regard. Now, which faction to start with? Well, honestly, it's a toss-up between the two. I could really flip a coin and whatever one it falls on be happy with. However, in having to make a tough choice, I think I will begin with the Sylvan F. Honestly, the only deciding factor between the two is the lore. As you guys know by now, I am naturally more drawn to the sides of good, and I just don't know enough about the Nighthaunt lore yet. The idea of the Sylvan F being more in the spotlight in this edition does give them a big advantage in the lore. Obviously we don't know yet, but I'm expecting them to have a very unique and interesting narrative as this edition continues. Having Alarielle and the Sylvan F on the march reclaiming the realm of life really has a unique narrative that I'm attracted to. Whereas with the Nighthaunt, really I've kind of missed it. These guys were the poster boys back in the previous edition. And while that's left them with an absolutely fabulous range, I just don't see them getting much coming in the coming years. I'll definitely buy their battle tome when that rolls around and we'll see what position they're in then. I could absolutely start a Nighthaunt force if there's some unique narrative still going for them. However, as we begin this new edition, like I said, I think Alarielle and the Sylvan F are in the stronger position. And being more inclined to the forces of good, and being a huge fan of the nature theme, the Wolf Lord is going to go with the Sylvan F. Now, how it's going to go, I don't know, but I am determined to try and make the time to sit down and get back to painting. Honestly, it's pretty hard with obviously all the life commitments as we know, and having to dive into all the lore for the channel. Now we'll make this an unofficial monthly project where hopefully I can drop down a little update to how it's getting along. And if any of you guys are diving into Age of Sigmar with the new edition, of course you can definitely let me know how your projects are coming along too. But with that said, again, I have decided upon the Sylvan F. So let me know what you think in the comments. Is this a good faction to go with for a novice painter? Should I have gone with the Nighthaunt, or is there another faction that you think I should have chosen? Or like me, do you just think you should begin with whatever faction steals your fancy? As always, leave your thoughts in the comments below, I love to read them. Huge thank you guys to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. And if you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.